So, but what happened was in 2014, we had about 25 years of successful free speech diplomacy. And then there was we tried to overthrow the government of Ukraine. We successfully did. And I'm not even arguing whether that's a good or a bad thing. But the fact is the U.S. did effectively January 6th, the Yanukovych government out of power in 2014. I mean, we literally had our Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasian Affairs, Victoria Nuland, handing out cookies and water bottles to violent street protesters as they surrounded the Parliament building and ran the democratically elected government out of office. But then what happened is the eastern side of the state completely broke away. So we don't respect this new U.S.-installed government. Crimea voted in a referendum to join the Russian Federation. And that kicked off, that sort of set in motion the events that would end the concept of free speech diplomacy as like a U.S. government unfettered good. Because what they argued is we pumped $5 billion worth of U.S. government money into media institutions in Ukraine. That's the figure that's cited by Victoria Nuland in December 2013, right before the coup. $5 billion setting up independent media companies, basically sponsoring Mockingbird style our media assets in the region. And they still didn't penetrate eastern Ukraine. Eastern Ukraine was primarily ethnic Russian, didn't penetrate Crimea. So they said, we need something to stop them from being able to combat our media influence. And they initially called this the Gerasimov Doctrine, named after Valery Gerasimov, who was this Russian general. They took a quote from him saying, the new nature of war is no longer about military to military conflict. All we need to do is take over the media in these NATO countries. And that's primarily social media. Get one of our pawns elected as the president, and that president will control the military. So it's much cheaper and more efficient to win a military war by simply winning civilian elections. So that was called the Gerasimov Doctrine. That's what set up the early censorship infrastructure in 2014. 3 years later, the guy who coined that, Mark Galeotti, would write a sort of mea culpa saying, oops, I'm sorry. Gerasimov was actually citing what the U.S. does. But by that point, they'd already renamed it hybrid warfare. NATO formally declared its tanks to tweets doctrine, saying that the new role of NATO is no longer just about tanks. It's about controlling tweets. And then Brexit happened in June 2016. In July 2016, the very next month in Warsaw, NATO added hybrid warfare to its formal charter, basically authorizing the military, the diplomatic sphere, and the intelligence world to take control over social media. And then 5 months later, Trump won the election, being called a Russian asset. So all that infrastructure was redirected home to the U.S.
Jesus. Whew. It was looking pretty bleak, I would say, in terms of the direction internet censorship was headed. It seemed like the censorship machine was winning up until around the time that Elon purchased X. That seems to me to be our fork in the road. That's the alternative timeline. You know, Mark Andreessen talked about that yesterday, that we've had a couple of alternative timelines where things have shifted. I think that was one of the big ones.
No, that's exactly it. I mean, he's sort of the timeline where we missed the bullet, is where there's a deus ex machina. You know, it's sort of like a deus ex machina where it's this random plot thing that happens. You know, someone descends onto the stage and solves all the plot's loopholes and magically saves the plucky heroes that were otherwise in danger.